Welcome to my basement, everybody. I've got a great guest on the show today, somebody you probably wouldn't have predicted. Jay Baruchel joins me, and he is talking about Random Acts of Violence, which I just watched. And Jay, where do I send my therapy bills to?
Send them right to me, buddy. Send them right to me. Send them right to this basement on the other side of the country. So I guess it got to you then? Is that what you're saying?
Wow, dude. Yeah, yes. Well, it's in the title, so you know we're going to be seeing some random acts. And what drew you to this? Because I know that this has been a project. You started this like in 2010, 2011?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, quite some time, quite a while ago. Straight up, first time was just the chance to to get to make something scary and to get to do it in a way that others hadn't done, to find something scary in stuff that people hadn't sort of really messed around with yet. What I mean is, like, there's a lot of scary houses in movies, a lot of scary space stations, and a lot of scary abandoned schools, but I haven't seen a lot of scary shit about the artistic process, and I have and the or artistic responsibility. And I thought that was seemed to me to be kind of fertile stuff to mine a scary story from.
Now, it's about a comic book writer, and it's from a comic book from Jimmy Palmiotti, and I'm wondering if that is a world that you're familiar with. Are you a big fan of comic books, and have you been
I am looking? Indeed. I've done a really good job of highlighting the important moments in my childhood creatively. I think about my parents showing me Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I think about my parents showing me Road Warrior, and I also think about my dad sitting me down and explaining to me why Superman is his guy and why Shazam is his other guy, and then him buying me the trade paperback of Death of Superman when I was in grade 5 or 6, whatever it was, and sitting there and read. And the thing is called Death of Superman, and I'd already known by a month at that point that he died. That's all any kids were talking about in the schoolyard.
Yeah.
And yet, with every issue that I finished in that thing, I was like, maybe it ends differently. Maybe I heard it wrong. Maybe there's a way he makes it through. There's got to be a way he makes it through. So, and also, so I came through Superman and Batman via my father, and then I found Punisher on my own. When I was a kid in Oshawa, Ontario, there was this used kind of bookstore. We called it GNU Books, because it was GNU, but it's really new, clearly a play on words. Anyway, I would go there and I'd buy a Punisher War Journal pretty much every week if I had enough change. The goal was enough change to buy a comic book, a Freezy, and maybe a round or two of Spy Hunter and Pizza. And a few years ago, for a period, I was part owner of a comic book company in Toronto called Chapter House. And I've gotten to write a few comics too. I've written, when you are part owner of a company, it makes it far easier to write shit for it. But I also got to write some stuff for DC and Marvel as well. And so it's one of my great loves.
That's awesome. But clearly have you been actively avoiding partaking in the Marvel universe or the DC universe to try to find your own direction, or did you do this so that maybe you pop up in an MCU movie or something like that?
Oh, geez. No, this is just, we didn't make this movie because there's a lot of popular comic book movies. This is going to be a very hokey answer. We made this movie because there was a really good story in the subject matter, in the source material, and so who knows what happens, but it is cool to kind of get to remind people that not every comic book is about a superhero. So sometimes 100%. It's about like 20-something artists and stuff, so but I would I'd cut off all of my limbs to make a Punisher movie.
So talk to me about the I don't know if it's a message, but certainly it's interwoven into the story, this idea of the responsibility of an artist, and even the sparks that fly between your Jordana Brewster and Jesse Williams because of Todd, the character that Jesse plays, obsession with telling this story and kind of honoring this crazy killer. Is that something that you kind of recognize in maybe some of the content that you consume and are predispositioned to look at the dark stuff in all of our media these days?
Oh, correct. That's exactly it. I'm kind of meditating on the questions I ask myself about my own kind of viewing habits and reading habits. I come by true crime pretty honestly, in that, like, my mother would read Max Haynes' column in The Sun every weekend, and this is always, my mom loved a great murder mystery, and I was a kid in Oshawa when Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka were wreaking havoc in that whole area, and it's like a pretty fundamental part of my childhood, that whole era. But I have, as I've gotten older, have tried to sort of wonder and ask myself, what is the experience? Like, why do I read this stuff? Am I reading it because I am so consumed with empathy for everyone killed? I wish that were the case, but I am connected to it because it's fucking crazy. And therein, and that's not wrong in itself. But it definitely has a slippery slope to it, because I think that there is, let's say, I don't know how I can say it any better than this. If a relative of mine was murdered and their murder was featured on something called My Favorite Murder, I would probably be deeply offended. There's a sort of solemnity that I think is kind of required with dealing with this stuff. And when you take that away, it ends up being, at the very least, irresponsible, at the very least tasteless, at worst irresponsible, I think.
Do you think that it's such a crazy damn time right now to, think about consuming anything, and that, the choices that we make, but do you think that this is, an interesting time where we're faced every day with the fragility of humans? And I think that there is this dystopia that we're living through. And do you think that we're, like, this is the perfect time to launch something or release something? Like The Last of Us 2 just kind of had to face that on PlayStation 4, right? Like a post-pandemic game. But I guess it does. You are obviously building a movie that has some deeper meaning than just our lurid fascination with the killer. You're trying to think about the ramifications. Yeah.
Ideally, but I also don't want to be didactic, and it's not my job to tell people. I don't like to be super heavy-handed. Now. There is some clear morality in the movie. The movie thinks some things are right and some things are wrong. But I also think the movie, more than anything, kind of traffics in a dialectic that doesn't necessarily have an easy answer. And why should it? Because it's made by people. And all of us are made up of contradictions. So even if I feel what I feel about all the stuff that I just said, I'm still listening to podcasts about missing persons and shit. And I'm still like, I just try to trigger in myself, at the very least, the same process that I have at the bloody grocery store, which is we all look at the back of the bag of chips and see what the ingredients are, don't we? And even if I still decide to put junk in, I want to know the junk I'm putting in, right? And I don't know that we all do that with records and cinema and TV as much as we should. And so that's more what it's about, is audiences asking themselves, like, what is your experience as a viewer in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie where the only person you can name is likely Freddy? And if Freddy's the only person you can name, can you honestly tell me anyone else is a protagonist? Like Heather is the only one I can name, right? And yet I can name Freddy, and I can name Jason, and I can name Michael Myers, and I would argue that makes them the protagonists of those films, which then the follow-up would be, what is that as a viewer? What is that experience as a viewer? That's vicarious sadism. Is north or south of vicarious sadism? And fine, that might be a thing, and that might be absolutely fine, but you should at least know that that's there, or we should at least understand that that's the thing you're putting inside you. Like that it's about and then questioning if that's correct yourself. Ask yourself if that's what you want, right? And also, even if you're not interested in any of these questions and don't share any of these concerns, more to a point, a horror movie's only goal, the only thing it needs to do, if it fails at absolutely everything else, if it looks like shit and sounds like shit, the only thing it needs to be is scary. Really.
Yeah.
And so few are actually scary. You know, when crazy outlandish gore happens, like to the point that it's almost Monty Python gore, where you're like, holy fuck! Like you're feeling all sorts of shit, but fear is not one of them, is it? It can't be.
Right.
That's not fear. That's like crazy, ridiculous shock. It's not fear. So I really just wanted to think about what is actually scary. And I think people fucking ticking time bombs out there, that shit's really scary. Looking at yourself and being disturbed by what you find in there, that's actually scary.
So what are you looking at now as this creative force in movie making now? You can direct and produce and write and craft your own things. You've been in front of the camera. You've done some amazing voice work. What's firing you up now? Are you starting to look at what project you're going to commit yourself to already?
Oh, so yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It's like this. It's like it's a freelance job, and so unless the resources are in a bank account, I can't ever put all my eggs in one basket. And so it's about sort of building a bunch of things at once, and they are at varying degrees of development and maturation, and then hopefully one of them gets enough steam that it becomes something. So like Random Acts, we were working on long before we knew there would be a sequel to Goon. And we made Goon 2, and we put some Easter eggs in it with the knowledge that random acts of violence might never happen. And then no harm, no foul. But if it does happen, for any nerd that gives a shit, this might be a funny little connective tissue. So technically, Random Acts of Violence and the Goon films take place in the same shared universe.
That's awesome.
But that's another thing. That's another thing for another time. So I have a lot of kind of things in varying degrees. But Jesse and I and this writer called Daniel Dansereau, we have had for now 4 years or so. TV project in development with CBC and Radio-Canada that would kind of be one of the, if not the first TV show that was sincerely bilingual. And it's a basically 1 hour long cop drama that takes place in Montreal between 1970 and 1976. When Montreal was the bank robbery capital of the world. In 1970, you have martial law. In 1976, you have the Olympics. And that's just an era in Montreal that both our sets of parents always waxed romantic about, and both our parents showed us Steve McQueen and Roy Scheider movies, and so it was our chance to kind of do that. And we sold a documentary pitch about the true story of The Great Escape, about how every character in that movie in reality was either a Canadian or an Englishman, mostly Canadian. That there were only 2 Americans in the entire camp, and both of them were flying for the RCAF. Ted Barris, really great writer, wrote a book about it, and so we are working with him on making that into a documentary for the CBC. And then there's my 2 sort of baby passion projects, which is my version of my telling of the Robin Hood story, and then there's this Spitfire pilot, Canada's most lethal Spitfire pilot in World War II. It was a guy called George Burling. It was a guy from Montreal, and the whole thing is Billy Bishop. We all know him. He has an airport named after him, and no one knows who George Burling is, and there's a reason why. But anyway, so there's a bunch of shit going on, and then I got a few acting deals and all that stuff. Yeah.
That's so fantastic, man. Do you find it easier to pitch a Canadian conception or a Canadian story? Or I feel like there's so much stuff that has happened in our country that has just not been put on screen for various reasons. But I'm wondering if the international kind of community, maybe because of companies like Netflix and stuff like that, there's more appetite for it and they want to dive deeper in it.
Yeah, because we have been particularly in English in English Canada, we have been pretty bad, I think, at lionizing, or at least drawing attention to events that and people that in any other country would be part of the patrimony. And I think there's a bunch of reasons. The biggest one is we inherited that British strain of shame, which I think is a good thing. But that coupled with our proximity to the States and our paralyzing fear of ever doing anything that's remotely American has made us bury a lot of it. And stuff like The True Story of the Great Escape is relegated to anecdotes told by granddads and uncles and stuff like that, And my mom's family is predominantly military. So I grew up knowing this stuff, assuming that it was as important to everyone as it is to me. But you're right about the international thing, because this is the thing. The last word any Canadians would use to describe Canada is exotic. But that's the last word anybody would describe about the place they fucking live in. That's the inherent, what's what makes something exotic, right? So when I started first I was just trying to wage the battle of things can take place here. No American is going to throw their fucking remote at the wall when they see that Doug lives in Nova Scotia, that Doug pays for a drink with Canadian money. You're not going to see a Scotia plate and be like, fuck this, I'm never watching this again. No, it's not. There's no such thing as prohibitively Canadian. Well, the extension of that is, beyond that, I'll go you one further. There's interesting shit here that people outside of here might find interesting, right? And the idea is like this, so we get to show people crazy, interesting, colorful, weird, diverse, inconvenient places that the world has shown us for years. We are just now, you're right, it's the rest of the world seeing us has allowed a lot of people here to see ourselves through their eyes, which is important because for 100+ years we have seen ourselves not even through our eyes, we've seen ourselves through American eyes. The sort of trope of how we view ourselves, of the like soft-spoken, humble, fucking agrarian Mountie fur trapper, which is they were there, but that's all an invention of American cinema. There's a really awesome thing, a great documentary called Has Anybody Here Seen Canada? And it's all about Canada portrayed in Hollywood cinema from the 30s onwards. And Canada to them was exotic, and it fulfilled a niche. And there used to be Westerns and Northwesterns, and that was and that was movies that took place here. Except for we had nothing to do with any of them. And the movie takes its title from something heard on a set of one of these movies. Has anybody here seen Canada? Does this look like fucking Canada? So they just made up what they assumed we were, but then we did the ultimate sin. We adopted it for ourselves.
Right.
And it's like, it speaks volumes. Speaks volumes about us.
Yeah, dude. And I feel like we're such a big country and we're so spread out, but we have many, many, many awesome stories to tell. And I know, and we can count on you being the guy that's out there digging them up and telling them. And super proud of that, and super proud of you. I hope one day we actually get to meet face to face and in person. But
I know it's been entirely digital. But I even went and shot like a thing for you. I did like a whole skit. And it's true, we've never met in person. But yeah, one day I look forward to it.
Yes, either here or Montreal or Toronto or LA, we'll do it.
That was Jay Baruchel on Vic's Basement. Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you all for watching. We'll be back with some new content soon, and until then, play forever.